Everyone watched. Nobody moved until he did. There are moments in a crowded room when silence becomes its own kind of violence. This is the story of Diane Calloway, a woman who had spent 3 years learning how to make herself smaller, quieter, easier to ignore. She lived in Portland, Oregon, in a house that looked fine from the outside, with a husband named Garrett who knew exactly how to destroy a person with a smile still on his face. She had a daughter, 6-year-old Macie, who had her mother's brown eyes and had already learned, far too young, that sometimes love comes with a flinch. What Diane didn't know, what no one in that restaurant knew, was that the man sitting 2 tables away was watching, and he wasn't going to look away. What happened next would change all 3 of their lives, but not in the way any of them expected. It started on a Tuesday, which is an ordinary kind of day for an extraordinary kind of pain. Diane had taken Macie out for her birthday dinner, a modest Italian place on Morrison Street with red check tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. Garrett had agreed to come. He'd even put on a clean shirt, which Diane had learned to read as a good sign. It wasn't a good sign. By the time the breadsticks arrived, he'd already made 2 comments about her hair. By the time the pasta came, he'd corrected her in front of the waiter, twice, about what she'd actually ordered. Even though she was certain, completely certain she'd said penny, he laughed when he did it. He always laughed. She gets confused, he told the waiter, waving his hand like she was a mildly amusing inconvenience. Macie stirred her lemonade with a straw and didn't look up. Diane smiled. She had a very particular smile she kept for these moments, thin and practiced, the kind that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. 2 tables over, a man named Weston was eating alone. He had broad shoulders, calm hands, and the look of someone who had learned patience the hard way. He was in Portland for work, something vague in logistics, or so he'd told the hotel receptionist that morning. And he'd chosen this restaurant because the reviews mentioned the tiramisu. He wasn't looking for anything. He wasn't the kind of man who went looking, but he noticed things, quietly, the way Diane's hand moved to Macie's shoulder every time. Garrett's voice rose, the way the little girl had stopped eating, the way Diane laughed at her husband's jokes a half-second too late, like she was translating from a language she was exhausted by. Weston looked back down at his food. Not your business, he told himself. But then Garrett said, loudly enough that the table beside them glanced over, "God, Diane, do you have to chew like that? It's embarrassing." The restaurant didn't go silent. That's not how these things work. Life just kept moving around it. Forks scraping plates, someone laughing by the bar, a child at another table asking for more ketchup. But Macie looked up, and her small face did something complicated and heartbreaking, the expression of a child who doesn't have words yet for what she's witnessing, but is filing it away carefully into some part of herself she'll carry for decades. Weston set down his fork. He stood up. If you're feeling this story already, please subscribe to the channel. It genuinely means everything. Keep watching. You won't regret it. He walked to their table without hurrying. Garrett noticed him first, straightening slightly with the instinct of a man used to controlling rooms. "Can I help you?" Garrett said, and it came out exactly the way he intended. Dismissive, territorial. Weston didn't look at Garrett. He looked at Diane. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. His voice was quiet, measured, the kind of quiet that has weight in it. "I just wanted to say, I heard you order the penne earlier. I was sitting right over there." "You were right." It was such a small thing to say. An absurdly small thing. Diane stared at him. Her throat moved. Garrett made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Okay, buddy. We're in the middle of—" "I know," Weston said, still calm. "I just wanted her to know she wasn't confused." He held Diane's gaze for exactly 1 more second. Then he nodded once and walked back to his table. The tiramisu arrived, he ate it. He left a $20 tip and didn't look back. Diane thought about that moment for 3 days. She didn't know why. It wasn't dramatic. He hadn't rescued her. He hadn't made a scene or confronted Garrett or done any of the things that happen in movies. He had simply told her she was right about her own pasta order. And for some reason that had cracked. Something open inside her chest that she hadn't even known was sealed shut. On Friday, she took Macie to Laurelhurst Park to feed the ducks. It was something they did when Garrett was in a mood. which lately was most days. Macie was mid-lecture about why the brown duck was, clearly the leader, because he walks like he knows stuff. Mama. When Diane looked up and saw Weston sitting on a bench across the path, reading a paperback, he looked up at the same moment. The odds of it were absurd. He didn't wave. He didn't immediately come over. He just looked, registered, and gave a single nod of recognition. Macie tugged Diane's sleeve. "Who's that man?" "Nobody," Diane said. And then, because Macie had her eyes and her stubbornness, "Someone I met." "He looks nice," Macie said, with the devastating confidence of a 6-year-old who has not yet learned to doubt her instincts. Weston came over eventually, after Macie had run ahead toward the pond and Diane was alone on the path for a moment. He asked if she was all right. Not in a pitying way. The way you'd ask, someone if they wanted an umbrella when you could see clouds coming. "I'm fine," she said. "You don't have to be," he said. "I'm just asking." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why did you do that?" "At the restaurant." He thought about it honestly. "Because your daughter was watching." Something in Diane's face shifted. Not much, but enough. They talked for 11 minutes. She counted later without meaning to. He was in Portland for 2 more weeks. The logistics company he worked with was handling a regional contract out of the Pearl District. He'd grown up in Calgary, moved around a lot, landed where the work took him. He asked about Macie's duck theory. He listened like it mattered. When Macie ran back to them, slightly muddy and completely unrepentant, she looked at Weston and said, "The brown duck is definitely the boss." "I believe you," Weston said. Macie nodded, satisfied, like a scientist whose findings had finally been peer-reviewed. The next 10 days moved slowly and quickly at the same time, the way significant things always do. Diane ran into Weston twice more, once at a coffee shop on East Burnside, once deliberately, though neither of them said so out loud. They talked. Long, careful conversations with space in them. He never pushed, never flattered. He asked her questions and actually waited for the answers. Macie, on the 3rd meeting, declared that Weston should come see the duck pond again because the brown duck had made a friend, and it was important news. Weston came. He pushed Macie on the swings. He didn't try to be her father, he was just present, unhurried, genuinely interested in the things she said. Diane stood at the edge of the playground and watched, and felt something warm and terrifying rise in her chest. She pushed it down. She was good at that. Stay with this story. Please, hit subscribe if you're feeling it. These stories take everything to make, and your support keeps them alive. On the 11th day, Garrett found a text on Diane's phone. It wasn't romantic. It was Weston asking if Macie had gotten over her cold. That was all it said. But Garrett read it 3 times, and by the 3rd reading, he had constructed an entire reality around it. The fight was bad. Not physical. Garrett was too clever for that. But the words were precise and surgical, designed to find the places where Diane was softest. He called her pathetic. He said no one would ever want a woman with her obvious problems and a child who wasn't theirs. He said she should be grateful. He said a lot of things that Diane had heard before, but that still landed like they were new. Macie heard it from her room. The next morning, she climbed into Diane's bed before sunrise and pressed her small forehead against her mother's shoulder and said nothing, just stayed there, breathing. Diane stared at the ceiling and made a decision. She texted Weston, "I think you should stop reaching out." "I'm sorry." He replied 2 hours later, "Okay, I understand. Take care of yourself, Diane." No argument, no guilt. Just, okay, which somehow made it worse. 2 weeks passed. Weston's contract in Portland ended. He flew back to Calgary. He sat in his apartment on a Tuesday night and looked at his phone and did not text her. He was very deliberate about that. He thought about Macie explaining duck hierarchy. He thought about the way Diane laughed when she forgot to guard it, and surprised and real and completely different from the practiced smile. He'd known women who were in complicated situations before. He'd always known when to step back. He just hadn't expected stepping back to feel like this. Meanwhile, Diane filed for a legal separation. It had taken her longer than it should have. It always does. when someone has spent years convincing you that the problem is you. But a child psychologist she'd brought Macie to had said, gently but clearly, that children absorb everything. That what Macie was witnessing was becoming part of how she understood love. That was the thing that finally moved Diane to move. She found a small apartment in the Alberta Arts District. She and Macie painted Macie's room a color, called ripe mango, which was very orange, and Diane loved it fiercely. Macie set up her stuffed animals along the windowsill like a parliament. It was hard. It was also quietly the first time in years that Diane woke up without the particular anxiety of not knowing what version of the day was coming. If this story is hitting you somewhere real, please subscribe. It means more than you know. Don't click away yet. 6 weeks after the last text, Diane's phone rang. Unknown number. Calgary area code. She almost didn't pick up. It was Weston's assistant, a composed woman named Sarah Linfield, calling to inform Diane that she'd been listed as an emergency contact by Weston Ibarra, and that he'd been in a minor car accident that morning, and that he was fine, but that he'd asked Tara to call her because she should hear it from someone before she saw anything online. Diane sat down on the floor of her kitchen. "Why would I see it online?" she asked. There was a pause. "Ms. Calloway," Tara said carefully, "are you aware of what Mr. Ibarra does?" She wasn't. The Weston she'd known ate tiramisu alone in Italian restaurants and read paperbacks, in parks, and pushed a 6-year-old on swings and listened. He'd said something vague about logistics. She'd never pressed what he actually was: the majority owner of Ibarra Meridian, a supply chain infrastructure company with contracts across 4 countries. He was, by any reasonable measure, extraordinarily wealthy. He had been in Portland that month, not for a regional contract, but to personally oversee the quiet acquisition of a rival firm, the kind of thing that gets mentioned in business publications. He had told no one in Portland who he was. He never did when he traveled alone. He'd learned years ago that being known for your money changes every room you walk into. He just wanted to eat tiramisu and have a quiet week. Instead, he'd witnessed a man publicly humiliate his wife, and a little girl watching it, and he had stood up. Diane sat on her kitchen floor for a long time after the call. Then she called the number back. Weston answered on the second ring. His voice was the same, calm, with weight in it. "You should have told me," she said. Not angry, just honest. Would it have changed anything? She thought about it. "Maybe, I don't know. That's why I didn't," he said. He flew back to Portland 3 weeks later. Not because she'd asked him to, because he'd asked if he could, and she'd said yes. They met at Laurelhurst Park. Macie was there. She had insisted. The brown duck was still there too, which Macie took as a personal sign. They sat on a bench, all 3 of them, while Macie narrated the political situation among the waterfowl with the seriousness of a field reporter. At some point she ran ahead to the water's edge, and Weston and Diane sat in the quiet between sentences. "I'm not looking for someone to fix things," Diane said. "My life isn't a project." "I know," he said. "I'm not handy anyway." She laughed. "The real one. The surprised one. I just want to know you," he said. "That's all. Whatever that looks like." Macie came running back at that exact moment, slightly breathless, to report that the brown duck had accepted a piece of bread directly from her hand, which she announced was basically the same as making friends. She looked between them with her mother's eyes and her 6-year-old certainty, and said, "You should come back more. We like you." Weston looked at Diane. Diane looked at her daughter. Something in her chest, that sealed, careful, protected place, and opened another fraction of an inch. "We'll see," she told Macie, which for Diane Calloway was the bravest thing she'd said in years. Some people stand up in a restaurant for no other reason than because a child is watching. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that is exactly the beginning of something that lasts. Watch the next story on your screen.